Marcus Brennan shuffled down Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, wrapped in stinking rags, unkempt beard of weeks, shoes held together with duct tape. The elegant women on the terrace of the city's most exclusive restaurant stared in disgust, unaware that beneath those filthy clothes hid the owner of 3,000 acres of Napa Valley vineyards and a fortune of $200 million. At the center table, Julia Henderson, fashion blogger, and his fiancé of 8 months laughed, surrounded by her influencer friends. When Marcus approached asking for a piece of bread, Julia's reaction revealed a devastating truth that would forever destroy the illusion of their love. Because sometimes you have to pretend you've lost everything to discover who would love you even with nothing. Dawn in September painted the Napa Valley in gold and amber, revealing 3,000 acres of vineyards cascading down the hillsides like an ordered green sea. The Brennan estate dominated from the highest ridge, the 19th-century mansion emerging from the morning mist like a dream of old stone and whispered history. Marcus Brennan woke in his massive oak bed, the same one his father and grandfather had slept in before him. 35 years old, carried with the grace of a man who always knew who he was and where he came from, even though fate had pushed him too early into the role of patriarch. 10 years earlier, when his father's private plane crashed during a storm over the Rockies, Marcus inherited not only a wine empire worth $200 million, but also the weight of 5 generations of tradition. The room lay in that golden twilight that only California shutters can create. Marcus remained motionless for several minutes, listening to the familiar sounds of the awakening estate. The roosters crow from the chicken coop, the distant voices of harvest workers already preparing for the day, the hum of Jose's tractor inspecting the lower vine rows. The phone on the nightstand vibrated, breaking the morning spell. 3 messages from Julia Henderson, all sent in the last 10 minutes. Marcus read them with a growing sense of discomfort that had become as familiar as chronic toothache in recent months. The first message was a photo of 2 dresses on the bed, with the question of which would be more appropriate for the evening. The second reminded him of dinner at Spago with her influencer friends, emphasizing how important it was to make a good impression since the daughter of an important Chinese investor interested in the American luxury market would be there. The third, which made Marcus clench his jaw, was an almost childish reminder to bring the Bentley instead of the embarrassing old Ford pickup, because image is everything in my world, babe. Marcus got up and walked to the window overlooking the vineyards. The sun was rising, turning the dew into fleeting diamonds on the leaves. He had learned to read these vines like others read books. He could tell from the shade of the leaves if the plants were stressed, from the way the grapes hung whether the vintage would be exceptional or just good. 8 months. 8 months with Julia Henderson, and he still couldn't tell if this relationship was love or a business transaction disguised as romance. He had met her at a charity event in San Francisco, where she shone like a star among photographers' flashes. Fashion blogger with 300,000 followers, daughter of a well-off but not wealthy attorney from Marin County, beautiful in that studied and perfect way that Instagram had made the standard. At first, he was fascinated by her energy, the way she turned every moment into a photo opportunity, the ease with which she navigated the social media world that was alien to him. But over time, he noticed disturbing details. There was the way her eyes lit up when he mentioned new investments or acquisitions, a predatory gleam that lasted a split second before being replaced by affectionate interest. There was the frequency with which she posted photos of the mansion, always tagging luxury brands and using hashtags like Vintner Life, Napa Luxury, Wine Heiress, the latter particularly irritating since the inheritance wasn't hers. Above all, there was the complete absence of conversations about the future that didn't include million-dollar projects. Never a word about family, children, growing old together. Only plans to open luxury hotels in the vineyards, transform part of the estate into an exclusive resort, monetize the Brennan brand, as she had said one evening, with an enthusiasm that made her seem more like a CEO than a girlfriend. Marcus went down to the kitchen, where Rosa, the housekeeper who had worked at the estate for 40 years, had already made coffee. Rosa had practically raised Marcus after his mother died when he was 12, and she read his face like an open book. The woman, 65 years of rural wisdom, watched him while he drank his coffee in silence, then simply said the young master looked like he had to make an important decision. Marcus smiled bitterly. Rosa had always had the gift of seeing through people. He admitted he was thinking about Julia, about their future. Rosa nodded slowly, then, with the frankness that only years of familiarity allow, observed that Miss Julia was pretty as a picture, but pictures were made to be looked at, not to live with. She added that Marcus's late mother, a woman of humble origins whom his father had loved passionately, was worth 1,000 Julias because she could see the beauty in a sunset without needing to photograph it. Rosa's words stayed with Marcus as he walked through the vineyards that morning. The harvest workers greeted him with genuine respect, not the subservient kind reserved for distant masters, but that earned by working side by side during every harvest. Miguel, the 70-year-old foreman who had served his grandfather, showed him some particularly promising grape clusters. As they discussed the optimal time to begin harvest, Marcus noticed how his hands caressed the grapes with the same tenderness one touches a newborn. This was his world, genuine, rooted in the earth, light years away from Instagram filters and social media strategies. It was at that moment, with the sun rising and the smell of damp earth in his nostrils, that the idea took shape in his mind. A test, cruel perhaps, but necessary. In his study drawer lay his grandmother's ring, a simple but perfect solitaire his grandfather had bought by selling his first vintage of Cabernet. Marcus had planned to propose next month, on their first anniversary. But first he had to know. He returned to the mansion and called Thomas Chen, his best friend since Stanford and now the estate's administrator. Thomas listened to the plan in silence. Then, after a long pause, said, "It was crazy, but understandable." He had seen how Julia looked at the account books with more interest than she looked at Marcus himself. Preparation began that same afternoon. Marcus drove to San Francisco in the pickup, parked in Oakland, and took public transit to the Alemany Flea Market. The flea market was a parallel universe where you could buy anything from authentic vintage to the most improbable junk. He bought a torn army surplus jacket that reeked of mold and stale cigarettes, corduroy pants worn at the knees, a shirt that must once have been white, but was now an indefinable yellowish gray. He literally found the shoes in a dumpster near the Tenderloin, a pair of work boots held together with duct tape, the sole coming off with every step. He returned to San Francisco and took a room in an hourly motel near the bus station, the kind of place where no one asks questions and the sheets have seen too many stories. For 3 days he lived there, methodically transforming himself. He stopped washing, let his beard grow, slept in his clothes to give them that worn look only the street can provide. He studied the real homeless at the station, the way they walked with shoulders bent by the invisible weight of failure, how they avoided eye contact yet desperately sought recognition of their humanity. He learned to shuffle his feet, scratch compulsively, speak with the broken cadence of someone who hadn't had normal conversations in months. He also created a detailed backstory. John Miller, former owner of a small winery in Sonoma, ruined by gambling debts. His wife had left him taking the kids, the house had been foreclosed, and now he'd been living on the street for 6 months. He had chosen elements from his real life, distorted enough to be unrecognizable but authentic enough to sound true. During those 3 days, he kept contact with Julia to a minimum. He told her there was an emergency with phylloxera attacking the oldest vines, that he had to stay in the vineyard day and night. She had responded with barely concealed annoyance, more concerned about having to go to dinner alone than about the health of the vines that represented the heart of the Brennan legacy. Julia's last message was revealing. She complained about having to make up an excuse for his absence, that her friends expected to see the millionaire boyfriend she talked about so much. Not a word of understanding for his work. No genuine, "I miss you." Just concern for image. The day of the dinner arrived quickly. Marcus took Bart to Los Angeles early that morning, then an Uber to Beverly Hills. He spent the afternoon near Rodeo Drive, sitting on the steps with a cardboard sign in front of him with shaky writing, "Hungry. Please. Help." Some tourists threw him coins, which he collected with exaggerated gratitude. A police officer told him to move along, and he obeyed with the submission of someone who had learned resistance was futile. At 7 in the evening, he approached the restaurant. Spago occupied a prime location with stunning views of the city. Marcus had dined there dozens of times, knew the maitre d' James, the sommelier Robert, even the owner who bought Brennan wines for his personal cellar. But that evening he was a ghost. Worse still, he was a disturbance to be eliminated. He managed to get into the building by mixing with a group of Japanese tourists, then took the service stairs instead of the elevator. When he emerged into the restaurant from the kitchen door, the staff was too busy to stop him immediately. The dining room was exactly as he remembered it, a triumph of whispered elegance, crystal chandeliers creating soft plays of light, tables with the finest linen, the discreet chime of crystal glasses that cost more than a worker earned in a week. The scent of truffle and champagne permeated the air like expensive perfume. And there, at the center table with the best view of the illuminated city, sat Julia. The red Valentino dress she wore, Marcus knew because he'd seen her buy it and had seen the $8,000 receipt.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Hugged her perfect body like a second skin. Her blonde hair was styled in an elaborate updo that must have cost hours at the salon. She laughed with that studied way of throwing her head back to show her swan neck. She was surrounded by her usual entourage, Madison Taylor, fashion influencer with 500,000 followers, famous for her luxury hauls, where she spent what a normal family earned in a year. Ashley Chen, PR for a French fashion house, always dressed in next season's clothes, always with the expression of someone who knows something you don't. And Brooklyn Fitzgerald, heiress to a San Francisco tech fortune, equally bored and spoiled. Marcus took a deep breath, smelling his own unwashed body, a mixture of stale sweat, moldy clothes, and that indefinable patina the street leaves on those who inhabit it. He straightened as much as possible in his new posture of defeat and approached the table. Brooklyn was the first to notice him, her aristocratic nose wrinkling as if she'd smelled something dead. Then Ashley, who instinctively pulled back, bringing her Hermes bag closer to her body. Madison already had her phone in hand, ready to document anything interesting that might happen. But it was Julia's look that Marcus would never forget. First confusion, then recognition of the situation, finally pure, unfiltered, total disgust. The blue eyes he'd seen light up with what he believed was love now looked at him like one looks at a particularly repugnant insect that has dared to enter one's personal space. At that moment, before even saying a word, Marcus had his answer. But now it was too late to back out. The test had begun. Julia Henderson's reaction was a dagger to Marcus's heart. Not just disgust, but pure contempt gleamed in her blue eyes as she surveyed him from head to toe. The woman who had whispered eternal love to him just a week before now looked at him as if he were particularly revolting garbage. Marcus played his part perfectly, asking in a hoarse voice for just a piece of bread, saying he hadn't eaten in 2 days. Julia's friends reacted with theatrical revulsion, Madison holding a perfumed handkerchief to her nose, while Ashley already had her phone out to record the scene. When Marcus mentioned he'd been a vintner, had owned vineyards in Sonoma, Julia exploded in cruel laughter. The same woman who knew every detail of his passion for winemaking, who had listened for hours to his stories about different vintages, now openly mocked this veiled confession. The words that followed were even more devastating. Julia and her friends began openly discussing him as if he weren't present, as if he were an inanimate object. Madison suggested calling security. Ashley philosophized about the need to clean the streets of such elements. Brooklyn quoted her tech mogul father, who supported the same theory. But the final blow came when Marcus noticed the ring on Julia's finger. It wasn't the 3-carat solitaire he'd given her, his grandmother's heirloom, but a new, flashier, unknown ring. When he inquired about it, trying to maintain a neutral tone despite his boiling blood, the truth emerged in all its brutality. Madison revealed with the unconscious cruelty of someone without filters that the ring was a gift from Stefan Mueller, son of a Silicon Valley venture capitalist. Julia kept him as Plan B, in case her Vintner boyfriend wasn't ambitious enough. The laughter that followed, the comments about Stefan's physical presence compared to the smell of earth and grapes of certain vintners, completed the picture. Marcus pulled from his pocket a final element of his test, a dried grape from the Brennan vineyards. He placed it on the table, saying it came from the estate of his old friend Marcus Brennan, watching terror paint itself on Julia's face as she realized the horrible truth. Color drained from the girl's face instantly. Her friends looked at her confused, while she stared at the grape as if it were a live bomb. Marcus walked out, escorted by security without turning around, though he heard Julia jump up calling his name with a voice broken by panic. The night after the restaurant debacle was hell for Julia Henderson. In her Marina District apartment, paid for by Marcus, she clutched the dried grape like a lifeline. His calls went unanswered, her desperate messages unread. When her friends learned the homeless man was Marcus Brennan, wine mogul worth $200 million, cover star of Wine Spectator, they understood the magnitude of the disaster. Thomas Chen, Marcus's administrator, called with ice-cold news, "Vacate the apartment. All privileges ended. Immediately." Julia's social downfall was spectacular. Homeless Gate went viral. The video of her cruel reaction shared millions of times. 300,000 followers became 100,000. Sponsors fled. The celebrated influencer became a symbol of greed and superficiality. After the forced retreat to her parents' house in Marin came the unexpected turn. Julia signed up at the San Francisco Food Bank as a volunteer. Sister Catherine received her skeptically but compassionately. For months, Julia served meals, initially disgusted, then increasingly humble. She learned the stories. John, the depressed ex-professor; Maria, the overworked immigrant; Ahmed, the Syrian engineer without recognition. Everyone had dignity beyond appearance. When Thomas came 6 months later for the monthly donation delivery, he found a transformed Julia, not externally, but at the core. He left a newspaper article. Marcus had donated $10 million for a homeless center, right where Julia worked. His words in the article struck her. He had turned pain into social benefit, while she wallowed in self-pity. A year later, at the opening of the Brennan Center for Social Reintegration, Julia worked as volunteer coordinator. The modest salary was a fraction of her former influencer income, but for the first time her work felt meaningful. When Marcus unexpectedly appeared at the opening, Julia tried to become invisible, but Sister Catherine, with a knowing smile, brought them face to face. The moment was electric. Marcus, initially surprised, watched as Julia spoke with genuine passion about the guests and their success stories. The woman before him was unrecognizable. Gone were Valentino and Chanel, replaced by simple clothes and real substance. She knew every guest by name, had concrete future plans, interacted with sincere respect. At the garden where former homeless tended vegetables, they stopped. Julia confessed without excuses her past superficiality and, paradoxically, thanked him for the hard lesson. Marcus recognized something new in her eyes: authenticity. When she shyly asked for coffee, to really get to know each other this time, he suggested a simple diner. Her sincere smile confirmed the transformation was real. The following months saw a slow and patient rebuilding. Coffee at Joe's Diner every Saturday, where a cappuccino cost $2. Working lunches to discuss the center. Evening walks along the Embarcadero. Marcus insisted on starting from scratch, without the masks of luxury. Julia discovered a Marcus she'd never known, the man who got emotional talking about terroir, who knew every employee by name, who read Steinbeck before bed. Marcus discovered an intelligent, compassionate Julia with a natural talent for organization that emerged in her work. A year later, at that same Joe's Diner, while construction workers ate breakfast before their shift, Marcus pulled out a small handmade wooden box that John, one of the center's guests, had made. Inside, a simple silver ring with a peridot, the stone of new beginnings that Marcus had personally found in his vineyards. The proposal was simple and direct. No promises of unbridled luxury, but of authenticity, respect, and a love based on who they really were. Julia accepted with tears of genuine joy, while the diner erupted in applause, and Joe, the owner, offered coffee to everyone present. The wedding was celebrated 6 months later in the small chapel beside the Brennan vineyards. No pomp, just family, true friends, estate workers, and center guests. Sister Catherine officiated with a special dispensation, reminding everyone that true love isn't what impresses the world, but what survives when the world isn't watching. John, the former homeless man, now a carpenter again thanks to the center's program, gave a moving toast. He told how Julia, with hands that once knew only silk, had served him soup with dignity and respect. How Marcus had transformed a cruel test into an opportunity for rebirth for an entire community. 5 years later, the Brennan Center had become a national model replicated in 10 cities. Julia directed the foundation that managed them, traveling across America with Little Mary, named after Sister Catherine, while overseeing new openings. One autumn evening, while Marcus checked the last harvest with his daughter in his arms, a journalist from the New York Times called for an interview about the power of redemption in social enterprise. Asked how she would define success today versus 5 years ago, Julia looked at Marcus lifting Mary into the golden sunset and answered simply. Success, she explained, was waking up knowing the person next to you would love you even with nothing. It was looking your daughter in the eye, knowing you're teaching her the right values. It was falling asleep having made the world kinder, not richer or prettier for Instagram. When the journalist asked about the famous homeless test, whether she ever regretted how things went, Julia was categorical. That test hadn't destroyed their love. It had destroyed the illusion, allowing true love to be born. A painful blessing disguised as tragedy. The dried grape that changed everything was now framed in their living room, a daily reminder that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really counts. While little Mary crawled between the vines and the sun set over the Napa Valley, Julia understood that her life, not perfect, not magazine-worthy but authentic, was worth infinitely more than all the followers in the world. The circle had closed. The cruel test of a September night had transformed into the foundation of a life built on true values. Public humiliation had become an opportunity for personal growth. The homeless man rejected at the restaurant was now the husband who loved her for who she'd become, not despite who she'd been. And while Napa prepared for another harvest, while the center welcomed new guests in need, while Mary took her first uncertain steps among the century-old vines, Marcus and Julia knew they'd found something more precious than all the fortunes in the world. A love born from truth, grown through forgiveness, and matured in the daily choice to see each other for who they really were. Because the true test wasn't that night at the restaurant. The true test was every day after, when they chose to love each other without masks, without filters, without illusions. And that test, unlike the first, they were passing together, one day at a time. Like, if you believe true love survives any test, comment your opinion. Was Marcus's test justified? Share if you think kindness is worth more than money. Subscribe for more stories of redemption and true love. Because in the end, the true test isn't how much you're willing to give to those you love, but how you treat those who can give you nothing in return. And true love isn't what endures when everything is perfect, but what's reborn stronger after seeing the worst.